It's 6 p.m. on Thursday here in Korea. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Hwang Ji-hye. And these are the headlines we're following at this hour. President Park Geun-hye calls on the nation to support her drive to reform 4 major sectors, including labor, that she says are vital to jump-starting the sagging economy. And armed with a plan to rewrite the country's tax code on top of its recent stimulus injection, the government is going all in to prop up growth. A team from Korea and the U.S. made a site visit to Osan Air Base today to get to the bottom of what happened with a shipment of live anthrax samples accidentally sent there. As she approaches the midpoint of her 5-year term in office, President Park Geun-hye addressed the nation, laying out her plans for running the country during the remainder of her term. She put a strong emphasis on labor reform, calling the next 3 to 4 years a watershed for sustainable growth. Our Choi You-sun starts us off.
Emphasizing structural reform as the key to shoring up Korea's new growth engines, President Park said her priority is revamping the country's rigid labor market. With the youth unemployment rate surpassing 10%, the president sought public support for a wage peak system of reducing wages for older workers to hire more young people.
저는 청년 일자리 문제를 해결하는 것이야말로 우리 사회를 건강하게 만드는 토대이자 저출산 문제를 해결하는 핵심적인 열쇠라고 생각합니다.
President Park then called for fairness and flexibility in the labor market, determining employment and wages based on a worker's abilities and achievements, not job security or how long he or she has been employed.
청년들에게 더 많은 일자리를 제공할 수 있도록 대기업과 고임금 정규직들이 조금씩 양보와 타협의 정신을 발휘해 줄 것을 간곡히 당부드립니다.
The president also vowed to implement the wage peak system in all public institutions this year, saying she expects to see 8,000 new jobs in 2 years. Prompting labor and management to resume negotiations with the government on labor reforms, President Park promised to raise unemployment benefits to 60% of a person's average wage and help the unemployed find jobs. In other areas, the president pledged to unify redundant public sector projects, expand a program that gives students a semester free of exams to foster creativity, and remove the corporate protectionism in the financial sector. President Park said it is the public that stands at the center of state affairs and only they can bring about changes and improvements to the country. She then urged the entire nation to join hands and share the burden for everyone's coexistence and prosperity. Choi You-sun, Arirang News.
Following the president's address, Korea's rival parties, as well as representatives from the management and labor sectors, issued their reactions to her speech. Our Park Ji-won has the details.
After hearing President Park's vision for the second half of her presidency, the ruling Saenuri Party vowed to fully support her drive to reform the labor, public and financial sectors, as well as the education system.
With President Park Geun-hye, the Saenuri Party will commit to completing the reform of the 4 major sectors that will determine the country's future.
The spokesperson also said the party shares the president's sense of urgency about making the labor market more flexible to create more jobs for young people. The main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy Party took a different view. The party's spokesperson said the speech was full of instructions, but there were no words of apology for the government's poor initial handling of the MERS outbreak or the surveillance allegations surrounding the spy agency. He said reforming Korea's family-run conglomerates is a more pressing issue than shaking up the labor market.
Given the messy feud over control of Lotte Group, what is most urgent is reforming the conglomerates. The president, however, did not suggest any measures for improving their outdated management structures and instead shifted all the responsibility for the nation's economic failings onto the labor market.
The Korea Employers Federation welcomed the president's plan to make the labor market more flexible. In a statement, the federation said the president's prediction that reforming the labor market will lead to the more jobs for young people is accurate. Conversely, the Federation of Korean Trade Unions, representing the labor sector, urged the administration to not force workers to make any more sacrifices and said the government should focus on improving Korea's skilled labor structure, infamous for having some of the longest working hours in the world. It said what is needed at this point is for companies to hire more people, pointing to the internal reserves of Korea's 30 top companies, which reached a combined $610 billion during the first quarter. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
Today, the Korean government rolled out plans to revise the country's tax code in a bid to stimulate a sagging economy hit hard by falling exports and the recent MERS outbreak. Our Shin Se-min reports.
The Finance Ministry announced its proposal for revisions to the country's tax code on Thursday, saying the goal is to stimulate the sagging economy hit hard by falling exports and the recent MERS outbreak, which dented consumer spending. Under the revised code, both domestic and foreign companies will get more tax breaks to encourage them to hire more young people. Small and mid-sized businesses will get a tax break of over $4,000 for every young worker they hire and $21,000 for large firms. The measure goes hand in hand with the government's efforts to ease the youth unemployment rate, which stood over 10% at the end of June, while the overall unemployment rate is just below 4%. The Finance Ministry also said it will offer taxpayers an individual savings account, or ISA, starting next year, with the hope of passing on some $470 million in tax benefits to account holders. The new system will allow taxpayers to control their investments in various funds and derivatives just by creating a single account. The revision comes on top of the government's $10 billion budget supplement, with some of the funds designated to compensate for tax revenue shortfalls seen from the past 3 years. But experts are skeptical.
It won't be enough to reduce the growing fiscal debt, because collecting more money from high-income earners and large companies will only help in the short term. Raising the wages of ordinary workers will have a greater impact down the road.
With the proposed tax law revisions, the government wraps up all its stimulus plans for the latter half of the year. So the question now is whether the measures will be enough to prop up the crumbling economy. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
Shifting gears, the Korean government says it will closely monitor Lotte Group's opaque corporate governance structure and capital flows, putting the country's fifth largest conglomerate under a lot of pressure. Finance Minister Choi You-sun said today he's disappointed with the retail giant's latest fight among the founding family members. But the minister said the government has no plans to change laws to ban existing cross-ownership of large conglomerates. The Fair Trade Commission earlier this week launched a review of Lotte Group's shareholding structure. And as the bitter succession battle at Lotte Group draws backlash from the public against conglomerates, the rival parties are moving to reform them. Our Ji Myung-gil has the details.
The ruling Saenuri Party showed its determination to prod private business groups, or chaebol in Korean, to reduce the amount of cross-shareholding among their affiliates and improve their governance structures.
It doesn't make sense that business owners are able to exercise unbridled power through the current shareholding structure with only a handful of shares. We must prevent them from controlling their companies like an empire.
Korea's fair trade law revised in 2013 bans new circular shareholding investments, but not existing ones like those in place at Lotte Group. The ruling party's chief policymaker said Thursday at a meeting with government officials that the party would seek to undo existing cross-shareholding investments at the country's conglomerates if necessary. He also said he has asked Lotte to submit details on its complex ownership structure by the end of the month. Those present at the meeting also discussed making conglomerates disclose their overseas stock holdings as well as their affiliated companies offshore. The main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy is urging the government to pursue economic democratization, promote fair competition, and rein in the chaebol's cross-shareholding practices.
The conglomerate-based economy is now seen as undermining the Korean economy, which has prompted calls to reform the anachronistic system. The government must get rid of its pro-chaebol stance and strive to foster a fair market economy.
The MPAD also said conglomerates are becoming a risk factor for the economy, rather than serving as a growth engine. The chaebol have been crucial to Korea's economic growth over the years, but they have amassed a remarkable record of embezzlement, bribery, and financial crimes that has enriched and empowered the families that run the businesses, at the expense of employees and shareholders. Kim Young-gil, Arirang News.
President Park is expected to pardon corporate leaders and millions of others next week in time for Korea's Liberation Day. The Justice Ministry is preparing a list of people to be pardoned, and it's expected to be finalized next week during a cabinet meeting led by President Park. The move is in line with her efforts to revive the economy and boost public morale. Politicians are not expected to make the cut, but many people will receive amnesty for less serious offenses, such as traffic violations. SK Group Chairman Choi Tae-won, his brother and Vice Chairman Choi Jae-won, and Hanwha Group Chairman Kim Seung-yeon will likely be pardoned. They are serving sentences for embezzlement and dereliction of duty. President Park's spokesperson would not confirm any names that may appear on the list. Staying in domestic politics, ruling Saenuri Party objected the main opposition party's so-called big deal proposal. NPAD had earlier proposed the ruling wants to change the way proportional representatives are chosen and would accept the ruling party's proposal for an open primary system in exchange. But ruling party leader Kim Moo-sung said Thursday the two proposals deal with separate issues and should not be part of a package deal. Kim said it would be hard to introduce the opposition's proposed system, which would increase the number of lawmakers considering the elections are only 8 months away. He added, however, the system could potentially reduce the regionalism in Korea and said there can be more discussions on the subject. 70 days after the U.S. military mistakenly sent live anthrax samples to a U.S. Air Force base in Korea, the two countries launched their first investigation into the matter. Kim Hyun-bin reports.
Officials from Korea and the United States conducted a joint on-site inspection of Osan Air Base on Thursday, after a live anthrax sample was mistakenly sent there in April. The Defense Ministry says the visit is aimed at calming public concerns by having first-hand verification about whether appropriate safety measures were taken at the facility. The group looked at how the anthrax sample came onto the base and the steps that were taken thereafter, including the sample's disposal. The Iranian shipment has raised calls in Korea for the government to have much stronger oversight of biological agents brought into the country by the U.S. military. In May, the Pentagon announced that the live anthrax samples had been sent by accident from a military laboratory in Utah to other labs in the U.S. and several foreign countries, including Korea. A joint working group launched earlier this month is currently reviewing law revisions aimed at preventing a recurrence of the incident.
Korea's defense ministry says that it will do everything necessary to prevent similar incidents from recurring, adding that it will get to the source of the problem, no matter how long it takes. Kim Hyun-bin, Arirang News.
It has emerged that the Japanese government was notified of Mitsubishi Materials' plan to apologize to American POWs forced into labor during World War II before the apology was issued last month. The news seems to reaffirm earlier speculation the Japanese government was in fact involved in the apology. Connie Kim reports.
Prominent Japanese firm Mitsubishi Materials notified the government of its plan to apologize to American prisoners of war last month. Seoul-based Yonhap News Agency reported Thursday on the comment made by Yukio Okamoto, an advisor to Japan-based Mitsubishi Materials Corporation, raising speculation the firm had gotten permission for the apology from the government. Okamoto also made clear that the apology was solely extended by Mitsubishi and said the government has previously reaffirmed that it already apologized to prisoners of war for their brutal treatment during wartime and it has no plans to compensate them. Last month, a Japanese company issued a formal apology for using American POWs as slave laborers during World War II. In response, the Japanese embassy in Washington had said the apology was made solely on Mitsubishi's initiative and that the government was not involved. Japan's Chief Cabinet Secretary Yoshihide Suga refrained from commenting on the matter. In his remarks, Okamoto drew a fine line between the prisoners of war and the tens of thousands of Korean victims of the forced labor program. Okamoto said Koreans were technically Japanese citizens during Japan's colonial rule, and their situation was totally different from that of the American POWs. An estimated 6,500 Koreans were forced into labor at Mitsubishi's affiliates, with more than 4,000 forced to work at Mitsubishi Mining, the predecessor of Mitsubishi Materials. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
And that brings us to the end of our newscast. More updates coming up at 10 p.m. Korea time, so stay tuned and goodbye for now.